Okay, so we call this series Tools for Life. This is the book of Pirkei Avot that I will be following with, but I would like you to follow with me, to join along. Let's look at the Mishnah. Let's discuss it. Let's dissect it. Let's learn the lessons from it. After all, that's what we're here to do. And there's a lot to learn. Pirkei Avot to me is fascinating. There's always lessons, tools for life that we could gain from it, that we could glean. And of course, if we have it as a discussion, then you could share your insights, your perspectives. So let's begin here with the very first Mishnah in front of us of chapter 2. Now, usually if you're reading it on Shabbos, as is our custom between Pesach and Shavuos, which we previously discussed. Why? Because we're, after all, preparing for Matan Torah, Shavuos. We experience God giving us the Torah, which happened 3,333 years ago. But we want to experience it in our lives again, and therefore it's appropriate that we cultivate our character, that we work on character refinement, and learning the ethics from our forefathers. So there's a lot to discuss here. And I think over the weeks, what we could do is we will go through the weekly chapter, but we'll try to continue from the Mishnah that we left off each time. And I'd like to always go with the upcoming chapter. So for example, this week we're going to be doing chapter 2. So that's why today I choose to go with chapter 2. Missing from this is the preface Mishnah, which we always recite. So I'll say it together with you. Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek l'olam haba. The Mishnah says that all of Israel has a portion in the world to come. Shenemar, as it is written, the Amech Kulam Tzadikim. It says this verse, I think it's in Isaiah, regarding the redemption of the future redemption. What does it say? The Amech Kulam Tzadikim. Your people are all righteous. La'olam Yishu Aretz, and they will inherit the land of Israel forever. Very appropriate today on Yom HaZikaron, the day that we commemorate those souls who stood strong in defense of Israel. They are the greatest, they are the holiest. They have put their lives in line for us. Somebody once came to the Rebbe and spoke about the no righteous people in his town in Eilat in Israel. And the Rebbe said to him, every single one of the soldiers are tzaddikim gemur. They are all righteous. Now, of course, you might point out the flaws, the faults, the shortcomings. Everyone's got those. But to think that they are there protecting us and standing up for us, because 75 years ago when we didn't have the land of Israel, we were in trouble. And thank God we do have the land of Israel today. And the Mishnah tells us that we'll have it forever and we'll never be exiled from it again. And what is the conclusion of the Mishnah? Everyone will recognize that they are the branch of my planting, the work of my hand, in which I take great pride. So that is the preface Mishnah that we recite before saying Pirkei Avos. Generally speaking, Pirkei Avos is said on a Shabbos afternoon. Of course, we're studying it today on a Wednesday. But generally, it is done in shul, customarily Shabbos afternoon after Mincha, because that's the time that Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, Shabbos afternoon. And when we study Pirkei Avos, which we started last week, and it begins by describing how Moshe received the Torah and the shalshelet, the chain of the tradition, how it was passed on from generation to generation. Moshe taught it to Joshua before his passing. And, it goes on. The Mishnah describes how it went from one generation to the next. And basically, what we read last week was Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai Masarli Yeshua. The Moshe received the Torah from Mount Sinai. Now it's interesting. It says Sinai. It doesn't say from. It doesn't say at Sinai. It says from Sinai. Which beautiful commentary I read last week is that this refers to the fact that Moshe learned two important lessons that we could all take as well. From not just that he received the Torah at Sinai, but what does it mean from Sinai? That the mountain itself taught him an important lesson. Number one, you have to receive the Torah, we have to be humble, like we know about Mount Sinai. Although it was a mountain, which tells us that we have to be proud, which is very important. But at the same time, the pride has to come with humility. And that's the way we receive the Torah. So as we're working on these weeks, getting closer to receiving the Torah, which is the reason we're studying this week, right? My father, blessed memory, used to tell me sometimes in the morning, he would try to wake me up. He would say, Arla, that's the way he called me. He said, we're having a guest today who's coming to we're having a special guest, a visitor today. First time this visitor is ever coming. And it's the last time. If you miss him, that's it, you missed it. And sometimes first 2 times or so, I got curious, who's this visitor? And he said, today is the visitor. Today will never be here again. Today's a one-time deal. That's it. It's just today. Just today. If we think about it, when we're counting the Omer now during these weeks, getting close to, as we are counting down to Shavuos, right? We're counting the Omer. And every day is a unique counting. We discussed the significance of the counting last week and many important lessons from it. But one thing that stands out is, as we count the days, we're counting to receiving the Torah, we're working on our personal refinement. And we realize that today is a unique day. And if we don't count the day, if we don't make the day count, then the day's lost, it's gone. You can never make it up. I think Aristotle once quipped that, who is the greatest professor, greatest teacher, but kills all of the students? Anyone know? Time. That's what time does. So it's a very important lesson that we could learn that's important as we go into Pirkei Avos. Yes, sometimes I'm not in the mood, I'm not ready, I'm not prepared. Carpe diem is the message. Seize this moment. Today is here today and it's gone tomorrow. Last night we counted 17. Tonight we're going to move on to the next count. So we really have to make the most of today's counting. In fact, if we miscounted one day, then we even can't count after that with a bracha, because the importance it's telling us about counting the Omer every day. But what's interesting is we read one Mishnah here last week. Hillel taught, he says, Im ein ani li, mili. If I'm not for me, then who will be, right? Uchesh la'atzmi. But if I'm only for myself, then what am I? Right? You know this famous teaching? And he concludes the Achshav, and if not now, then Eimatai, then when? Right? As I look at that Mishnah, I sometimes wonder, what's the connection? What's the relevance? What's the connection of the first part of the Mishnah, where we're saying that if I'm not for me, then who will be? To if not now, when? But as my father explained it to me, there's a beautiful way of understanding it. And that is, yes, Sheila, you wanted to say something?
No, sorry.
Yeah, what did you want to say? Eh?
No.
So, yeah? So, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. What's the connection from the first part of this Mishnah? If I'm not for me, who will be? And if not now, then when? But we have to realize, just as I am unique, that's right. There's no one else like me. No one has my DNA. As we always remind each other in this share, we, each and every one of us, are indispensable. Yes, I know the secular phenomenon is that nobody's indispensable. But God says, no, but we are indispensable to God's plan for this world. That's right. This world cannot exist without each and every one of us. So just as your DNA is unique, today is also unique. And today it will disappear. It will be gone. If I don't make the most of it today, then forget about it. It's going to be gone and will never return again. And so I think it's teaching us a very important and profound lesson for life about making the most of each and every single day. There's an expression out there, and you'll have to correct me if I don't have it accurate, but it's something to do like this, or maybe there's different versions. But if you want to know the value of a year, they say, ask a student who was held back. Personally, I have a perspective on that sometimes it is beneficial. What are you rushing into? sometimes I don't wish I was held back, but sometimes I think there are certain benefits to it. If you want to know the value of a month, then just ask the mother who gave birth to her baby prematurely. If you want to know the value of an hour, then ask lovers who are waiting to meet. If you want to know the value of a minute, ask somebody who just missed the bus or a train. In fact, I remember I was once rushing on a Friday over 20 years ago in Brussels. I needed to catch a train to Luxembourg. We were going there for Shabbos. We wound up not going there for Shabbos, and we stayed in Brussels. But I was coming from Antwerp, so we were running a camp, and camp would finish like 2:00 on a Friday. And we basically, as soon as camp finished, we darted out to the train station. It was maybe a 10-minute walk from our campsite. And then from there, we took a train to Brussels, half hour, 45-minute train ride. And then we would take a train from there to Luxembourg. I remember we were getting our tickets, paid my credit card. That's a whole other story, because actually it's a worthwhile story to tell you within the story. One of our friends, it wasn't that time, it was a different time, was struggling to pay. The credit card wasn't working, was being declined. And there was a lady standing on the line, and she said, "I'll pay for your tickets and you'll pay me back." She wasn't a Jewish woman. And somebody else asked her, "Why? How do you trust these people? You don't know them. You've never met them." And she said she worked for a Jewish family in London, and they were trustworthy. And therefore, she says, she trusts Jewish people. These were, religious Hasidic boys. She said, "I trust them." And I think it's a very important message about the reputation we create, not just for ourselves, but for others as well, when we live in a proper and appropriate way. But anyways, my story was that we finally got our tickets and we're running to the platform to catch the train. And as we're running onto the platform, the train is pulling away. And somebody said, "You should have run a little faster." And my response was, "No, we should have run a little sooner." But that's it. Within a minute, we missed the train and we couldn't go to Luxembourg for Shabbos. And till this day, I still never made it to Luxembourg. So just sharing that every moment has its value. They say if you want to know the value of a second, ask someone who missed a life-threatening accident. God forbid, what 1 second on the road could have done. And if you want to know the value of 100th of a second, ask somebody who came second place, who won only a silver medallion in the Olympics. And if you want to know the value of a day, then ask somebody who missed the counting of the Omer just once. And I think this is part of what the Mishnah is telling us here, is how to value our time. And throughout Pirkei Avos, we're going to find many valuable lessons for life. So let's continue. Let's begin. The chapter today we're going to look at is chapter 2. And let's read the Mishnah together. Rabbi Omer, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi would say, and let me just pull this up here. I think there was a footnote, but where did it go? Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was the compiler of the Mishnah. Yeah, we discussed this long ago, so I'm not going to look at all those footnotes, right? Rabbi Omer, Ezehi derech yeshara shigavra leha adam. Which is the right path for a person to choose? What's the correct path that we should choose in life? What do you say would be the right way to, the right path? Let's hear the words of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who is the redactor, the compiler of this Mishnah. And I guess he could say he's asking, what's the proper path for life? Apologies here. What's the proper path for life? What's the ideal approach? Now, he's using the term here, derech. Derech generally is used as a way to describe a derech Hashem, an approach to divine service that a person should take. So what's the answer? Of course, let's read the Mishnah and see. He says, how did I lose the place so quick? Okay, there we go. Kol shehi teferes le'oiseha. Whatever path it is, any path that is honorable and beneficial for himself, v'siferes lamina adam, and is also honorable and beneficial to other people. Be as careful with a commandment that you think is not so important as you are with a commandment that you think is very important. Because you did not know how much reward is given for different commandments or how important they are to God. Right? We should compare any expenses or loss of money that might be caused when we do a commandment with the reward that we will receive for doing it, and compare that temporary physical gain from a sin with the loss that it will cause. Histakel b'shlosh dvarim. The Mishnah concludes with this thought: consider these three things that we are going to mention right here. The ein ata ba l'dei avera. If you contemplate these three things, then you will not come to commit any sin, to transgress. What are they? Da malamayla mimach. Know that what is above you. What is above you? Says the Mishnah. Ayin ra'eh, there is an eye that sees everything. The oizen shamas, there is an ear that hears everything. V'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nechtavim, and all our deeds are written and recorded in a book. I would imagine that long ago, that was a little bit of a fantasy. Really? Somebody sees everything I'm doing? Reminds me of the story. There was once a person who was traveling with his friend, and on the way, they were going through some orchards. He wanted to take a fruit for himself to enjoy. Says this friend, just make sure that balabas, nobody's looking. He's about to pull off a fruit from the tree, when all of a sudden his friend interjects. He says, wait, somebody's looking. Jumps down, looks around, doesn't see anyone, goes back. Somebody's looking. So who's watching? Who's looking? His friend reminds him, God sees everything. But it's easy for him to say, Tumarat Taiva, don't bother me. What are you telling me? Somebody's looking. Who's looking? You see anybody looking? But if we examine this Mishnah, where it's telling us that a person should consider to ensure that every commandment is done, obviously we all have free choice in this world, right? We have to make a conscious decision about what we're doing and how we're doing it, and not just to do it in a thoughtless or habitual way, but rather to think through, what am I doing? Is it appropriate? And how do I want to ensure that I prevent myself from coming to any kind of a sin? The author of this Mishnah was a very successful person, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the compiler of this Mishnah. And he was telling us the important lessons that he took to see the world, as we discussed this yesterday, as an equally balanced scale. And the next deed that I perform, the next action I take, is going to make all the difference. So it's very important that we view the world as that equally balanced scale, and we consciously decide about what I'm doing and ensure that it's done in a proper way. So I think this mission is really teaching us exactly that, the importance of balancing our own needs with the needs of others as well. Because if we consider the wording of this Mishnah about the value, the loss, the gain, right? So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is teaching us, he was a leader. He was the leader of the community. He's telling us a leader has to be willing to forego their own personal benefit in order to assist others as well. So I think these are some of the ideas that we are gleaning from this Mishnah. Let's just think any other. I mean, he's telling you want to take a path that's pleasant, that is pleasant, harmonious with the one who does it, and harmonious for mankind, as he put it, as they translate it here. Any questions on this Mishnah? I think there's a lot of nice insight, but I'm wondering if to go on to more Mishnahs or to start opening my books and reading the commentary. Maybe it's better that I prepare the commentary before reading them. So for now, what I'm going to do is move on. But there's just one thought that does come to my mind over here, where he talks about being careful with a mitzvah. And it connects with this idea of seizing the day that we discussed before. Because the story goes about a particular person who was once imprisoned, and the authorities offered him a day off of jail. He wasn't sure what day should he take. Should he wait for a particular holiday? Should he wait for a family simcha, celebration, maybe for his kid's bar mitzvah, his daughter's wedding? What particular event should he request to have his day off of jail? And he wrote this letter to the Ravid. And what was the Ravid's response? Seize the moment now. You have an opportunity to get out of jail today. Carpe diem. Seize the moment now. So the point is, take this moment and make this the moment. Okay, any questions on this first Mishnah? Otherwise, we're going to go on to the next Mishnah, as you can see it here on the screen. And any questions? Okay, perhaps in the future I could do it with more commentary. For now, let's just look at the Mishnah. For today, you're going to accept Ari's commentary, whatever thoughts come to my mind. And have more time to prepare, I could put together other commentaries as well. Yes, Rosalind.
May I say something? I'm sorry, I do have help from a beautiful book called Pirkei, Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers that I learn with my grandchildren. And it just says, no small matter when it is particularly hard to fulfill a specific mitzvah, the Yetzer Hara may try to discourage you and say, why work so hard to fulfill such a small mitzvah? The Mishnah tells us how to respond. Be as careful with a small mitzvah as with a major one. Each mitzvah you fulfill connects you to Hashem.
Yep, absolutely. And the very word mitzvah means, besides for commandment, it also means a connection. So certainly when we fulfill a mitzvah, we are absolutely doing that. We are connecting. That's it. It's a connection. And I'm using the very same book sitting here in front of me. This is the one I'm using. Although on the screen, I have displayed a different Mishnah that I found available in order to share with everyone. So we have two. If you have this version of the Mishnah, then by all means, follow along. This is the one I'm using here to guide, for myself. But if anyone has any other, but I do have in front of me a few other books on Pirkei Avos, but it's just a matter of going through them and reading the various commentaries, which I could do together with you. But it's not unless I prepare it. It actually it doesn't flow. So I'll just let my mind think of whatever other insights along the way. But please feel free to interject and to share any particular insights that stand out to you. Okay, we're ready to go to the second Mishnah, ladies and gents. Let's go to the second one. Rabban Gamliel benoish Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Now, this first Mishnah was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Now we're going to go on to his son, Rabban Gamliel. He said as follows: Yafa Talmud Torah im derech eretz. Beautiful is the study of Torah with the way of the world. Okay, it's very nice that you study Torah, but you also need to have a job. There's different ways of understanding what is derech eretz. Generally speaking, the term derech eretz that I was raised with, derech eretz is not only specifically referring to a job, but also derech eretz, the way we treat others. In fact, we read the Mishnah, derech eretz kadma Torah. The basics of the way we treat others comes even before the Torah. We say in our prayers every morning, La'olam yehei adam yirei shamayim. Forever you should be what's adam, a mensch. If you're not a mensch, you can't be God-fearing. So in order to be a God-fearing person, you also need to be adam, a mensch. Anyone who's not a mensch, they can't convince you or me that they are God-fearing as well. So what is Rabbi Gamliel saying? He says, very nice that you study Torah, and that's very important, but you should also have derech eretz. If you don't have derech eretz, you don't have Torah. And he goes on, She'igia shnei mashkachas avan, because working hard at both of them will keep you away from sin. And you could say that, a person who has a job and studies Torah means you have commitments in life, then that will certainly prevent you. I don't know if anything's certain, but it certainly helps with preventing one from committing sin. And at the same time, I think if it's referring here to derech eretz, about the way we treat others, it means that we have a relationship with God through the Torah, and we have a relationship with others in derech eretz. You need both. Chol Torah she'ein ima malacha sofa betela v'gereres avam. Ultimately, all Torah study that is not accompanied with work is destined to seize and to cause sin. So here, this is a very important point. But what is work? What is work? First of all, he's talking here about derech eretz, right? So maybe work is referring to the labor that you do to raise, to provide for your family. That's one way of understanding it. Another work, in my mind, is, the Torah requires work. We don't just like that understand it. It takes effort. It takes work to understand the Torah you're studying. And if you don't understand it fully, then you have to restudy it. When people say to me, I study the Parsha, I find it a history, I don't find its relevance to my life today, then you haven't studied it properly. Because when you study the Torah properly, you see its connection, you find its relevance to your own life. And that's so important. So what we're saying here is it requires work. Your Torah requires work. And what he's saying is you need the combination of work, of physical, and of spiritual. We need both in our lives. Okay? So that's very, very, important. And we're saying here as well, if we're talking about the interpersonal relationships, not only about our relationship with God, then yes, while it is a challenging commandment to keep the Torah, and it's challenging sometimes to love people who maybe their relationship with us is not easy to have, but still it requires work. That's what we're saying here. Everything is work. What do you think? We're born in labor. It means it takes work, right? Let's continue the Mishnah. Whoever works with the community should work with them for the sake of heaven. Now, what does that mean, to work for the sake of heaven? Am I working because of the honors, because of the yichus, all the honors I'm going to get, that people say, "Oh, look at him, look what he does"? Is that the point of why I do whatever I do? Yeah, it's an important thought to consider. He says, this continues on the theme that we discussed yesterday, that as much as we perhaps, we do our work, but he says, the merit of the ancestors will aid them. What does that mean? The merit of our ancestors helps us succeed in our communal work. We stand on the shoulders of the giants who preceded us, who were here for us, who planted the seeds for us. And we continue and do that on for the next generation. We can't think, okay, I have no care or responsibility for the next generation. Of course we do. We are the forebearers of the next generation. And their righteousness will endure forever. We are ensuring the perpetuation of our legacies. Now, this isn't just about saying about my legacy, but that I'm doing that the next generation can also benefit. And the Mishnah concludes, although the person was helped, we have the help of those who came before us. Nothing is in a vacuum. It all happens, but the verse that's quoted, God says, I will credit you with great reward as if you have achieved. What does that mean? You are obviously doing the work. You're pulling the strings. You're doing whatever you can. But remembering that there were those who preceded us. Okay. Any questions on this Mishnah? Just want to see here what the story is mentioned. Okay. Any questions or thoughts or insights anyone wants to share? If not, we'll move on to the next Mishnah. We'll just keep reading the Mishnahs and gleaning the lessons and messages we can from them. Okay, Mishnah 3. Havu Zahirim Barashus. Be careful with those who are in power. What's those who are in power? Are we talking here? What could be? They translate it here, be careful with the government, right? But maybe, perhaps you could say those who are in power is an allusion to our own thoughts and feelings that control ourselves. And we have to be wary of them. Because sometimes it's our mind that wanders, and where does it lead us, right? We say Shema every day. Not to always follow the instincts of our eyes and our heart, our feelings, right? They can convince us to do things. So we have to know, we have to use our mind to control our heart. And therefore we use the Torah as our guiding post to tell us what's right, what's wrong. It's not our own instincts that decide. So the Mishnah continues, in this context, maybe we're talking about government officials, who oftentimes these politicians, they befriend a person only for their own needs. They seem to be a friend when they are benefiting from a person. But they will not stand by a person and help them in their time of distress, in their time of need. And maybe the Mishnah is telling us what we shouldn't be. Those who are friends only when there are fringe benefits that we have with our tzitzis, right? The tzitzis are our fringe benefits. But the Mishnah is telling us, be careful with such personalities who only know you when they need a favor from you. And of course, as they say, a friend in need is a friend indeed. So we got to know what truly is a friend. And there's an interesting story that's mentioned here in this version of the Pirkei Avos, that the Malbim once had to travel to Paris to meet with government officials regarding a communal matter. And he asked the mayor of his hometown, he lived in Bucharest, Romania, to write a letter of recommendation for him to present to the official in Paris. And the story goes that, perhaps he thought that having such a reference would give him a better chance at succeeding with the officials that he was going to see. And so when he asked the mayor for a letter of reference, the mayor gave him one, put it in an envelope, sealed it, and sent him off. While he was traveling, it occurred to him that it was likely that the mayor, who was not known to be the best friend of the Jews, who knows what he actually wrote? And he said, really, I shouldn't put my trust, my faith in the mayor, but only in God. And at some point, he decided to just rip the letter up, and that's it. One of his people one of the students who accompanied him was curious what it actually said in the letter. So he pieced the letter back together afterwards and noticed that, in fact, it wasn't a very favorable letter. It was not, in fact, this mayor wrote things that were inappropriate that would have caused the rabbi trouble. And of course, this is, again, just illustrating how we have to just keep our faith in God, and certainly not to put it into those politicians who only know you when there's benefits and favors that they could receive in return. Let's go to the fourth Mishnah. Hu haya omer. He would say, who's he? We're continuing here, Rabbi Gamliel, right? He would often say, Aseh retzaynai ki retzayncha. Make that his will should be your will. Treat God's will as though it were your own will. Kedei sheyaseh ritzonnecha ki ritzonno. Why? So that he will treat your will as though it were his will. Basically, there's a little bit of a quid pro quo going on here, that you want God to do what you want, do then what God wants. Very simple, right? Batel ritzonnecha mipnei ritzonno. Then set aside your own will in favor of God's will. God's will is you should keep Shabbos. Well, maybe that interferes with your golf. Maybe that interferes with your shopping. But you are putting aside your own will for God's will. And in return, says Rabbi Gamliel, is that he will set aside the will of others in favor of your will. We discussed many times what it means to sacrifice for your Yiddishkeit. The very word karban, coming from the word karov, etymologically meaning to come close. You want to come closer to Hashem? Yes, that will require sacrifice. Just like any other relationship you want to cultivate with anybody, certainly for God as well. But here it comes with an extra benefit. You set aside your will for Hashem. Hashem will set aside his will for you. God will even put aside other people's will for your sake. Let's continue the Mishnah. Hillel Omer. Hillel said, or Hillel would say, Al tifrosh min hatzibur. Do not separate yourself from the community. Don't ignore the community's needs. Don't think that, I don't have to worry about others. We don't live in a vacuum. We have to be there for others as well. Hillel is reminding us very simple tidbit tools for life. But these are things we have to really sometimes remind ourselves. And his next words, very powerful as well. The al tamin ba'atzmacha ad yom mosach. We have to always stay on guard. Don't be so sure of yourself, of your ability to withstand temptation. Sometimes it's easy to judge others, but you never know when you self get into some kind of trouble. We're human beings. And he says, until the day you die, and we certainly, I was in a restaurant, what is it? It's over a year ago the last time we went to a restaurant. But they asked me what type of Coke I want. You want the diet? I said, no, I don't want to die yet. So certainly we don't want to die yet, right? Please God, we all stay healthy and well. The story about old Jewish lady winds up in a church because it was raining, pouring outside, and she's standing there listening to the sermon by the pastor, and he says, who wants to go to heaven? And all the people in the church raise their hands, except for this old Jewish lady. He said, don't you want to go to heaven? He said, what's the hurry? I want to go there, but not so quick. So Hillel's telling us, don't trust yourself till the day you die. Right? And we don't want to die yet, but every day we're here, remember, don't be so sure of yourself. Do not judge your friend until you are in their place and can fully understand what they're going through. What do they say? Don't judge another until you walk a mile in their shoes. Then you'll be a mile away and you'll have their shoes. But it's a serious matter that people are oftentimes judgmental. And we read a different Mishnah. Here it's saying, Al Tadim. It's saying, don't judge. If you have to judge them, put yourself in their place. If you ever want to judge somebody. Al Toimar Davar She'i Efshali Shmoya Shesoifai Lihi Shama. Do not say something that is not easily understood, relying on the fact that it will be understood after more thought, because it might be misunderstood. Or also, I perhaps would understand that. Do not say something that should not be heard, because ultimately it will be heard. That's the way I understand this Mishnah literally, as you can see here from the commentary of the Bartanura. But that also stands true because people say things. Today, these days with social media, people make announcements, they say things, and you can't take it back. We learn about Lashon Hara in this week's Parsha. Be careful, loose lips sink ships. And certainly, another important and powerful message from Hillel here is, careful what you say. Don't think your words are not going to travel. They travel so quick. And once you send that WhatsApp out, anybody could share it, forward it, spread it further. The Al Tomar, and this again is another very important teaching from Hillel. One should not say, Lichishe efne eshne, when I have a chance, when I free myself of my concerns, whatever, when I have the time, then I'll study. Because Shema loisi paneh, because you never know, as the Mishnah is saying, perhaps you'll never free yourself. Maybe you'll never have free time. There's always things that come up. There's always things that get in the way. You want to declutter your home? Don't tell yourself, one day I'll get there. You want to do it? Just do it. You want to make that phone call to someone? Pick up the phone, make that call. Do what you say you're going to do, because if you keep saying, I'll get to it one day, who knows when you'll ever have that free time. And again, very powerful teaching from Hillel, and goes back to what we said at the beginning of today's shir and from the previous Mishnah, that Hillel says that if I'm not for me, who will be? And if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, then when? I think this really connects with the same teaching. If not now, then when? He says, if I tell myself that I'll do it when I have free time, will you ever really have free time? Always have good excuses to procrastinate. And Hillel's reminding us, why we shouldn't put off for another day. Yes, Razan.
What was that shoe, Nike? Just do it.
Exactly. Just do it.
Just do it.
So we got to just do it. That's exactly what the Mishnah is telling us. That's what Hillel's teaching. Just do it. Carpe diem. Seize the moment. Get it done. Hu haya omer. We're continuing now with the teachings of Hillel. And Hillel says here as follows. Ein bur yirei chet. A bur cannot be sin-fearing. Now, what is a bur? Is a bur an Afrikaner? I don't think so. That's not what it meant. A bur. Bur literally means an ignorant person, a rough, uncivilized person. Perhaps the bur isn't necessarily an ignorant person per se, but rather someone who's unaffected by what they learn. In other words, their Torah knowledge doesn't refine them, doesn't make them a better person. And the idea of our studying is that it's meant to refine us, that it's meant to be relevant and pertinent to our lives. So this Mishnah teaches us that we have to apply everything we learn so that our sensitivity, our conduct will be improved. This sphera doesn't just mean to count. We don't just count the Omer, but sphera means to shine. We polish our personalities every single day of the Omer counting. So he's telling us here, if a person is a bur, then they can't fear sin. They're not afraid of sin because it's not relevant. It's not becoming personalized, not becoming internalized. When we learn something, we have to make it real, relevant to ourselves. V'loi am haaretz chassid. An unlearned person cannot be a chassid. What is a chassid? Well, here they're translating it as pious. But more than that, someone who's extra careful with the Torah and its commandments. Because here in Pirkei Avos, it tells us you want to be a chassid, you want to be pious, then you go beyond the letter of the law. The ignorant person, how is he supposed to go beyond the letter of the law? He doesn't even know the law, doesn't want to study, doesn't care. What's the difference between ignorance and apathy? I don't know and I don't care, right? So the idea here is that, what happened? With that this is a reminder that you should care. It's an important message to us. Of course you should care. The next teaching is that a short-tempered person, that's one way of translating a baishan. They write here, short-tempered person. The way I always understood a baishan is also a bashful person, a person who's always embarrassed to ask questions. You can't learn. No shame, no gain. You have to be able to ask those questions. You need to. V'loi hakaptan melamed. An impatient person who gets angry easily cannot teach. We all know that we may have had such teachers, and it was not very conducive. It doesn't work. Okay, so sorry, I skipped. A bashful person cannot learn, and a short-tempered person cannot teach. That's the Mishnah. Again. A bashful person cannot learn. A short-tempered person cannot teach. A person who spends too much time in business cannot become wise with Torah knowledge. Now, in what sense do you understand that? Is the bottom line just about more money, about more business, or can you have a proper balance in your life? I need to earn an income, but I also need to be able to dedicate time in my life to study, to grow my wisdom and my understanding of Torah. And the whole purpose of the Torah study is not just to have wisdom, but rather what am I doing with it? How am I applying it to be relevant, to be real in my life? In a place where there are no leaders, you should become the leader. You step up to the plate. You ever find yourself in a situation where there's just a lack of leadership, where nobody's taking the action that's necessary? Well, the Mishnah is telling us, you take up that position of leadership. You do what's necessary. You step up to the plate. I see there's a few more Mishnahs here from Hillel. Let's try to read through them quickly, so we're not going to do much commentary today. Hillel once saw a skull shetzafa al pnei hamayim, that was floating upon the water. Omar la, so Hillel said to the skull, al di atfe atfuf, because you drowned. He was basically describing God always causes justice in the end. And therefore Hillel says to the skull that because you drowned others, that's why you were drowned. Right? The soif mitayafayich yetufun. And those who drowned you will eventually be drowned. There will be retribution for drowning you. And I think Hillel is teaching us another profound lesson. It's sort of you reap what you sow. And we got to be careful with our actions because what goes around comes around. Let's continue with the final teaching of Hillel for today, Mishnah Zion, the 7th Mishnah. Hu Haya Amar, Hillel would often say, Marbe Basar, Marbe Rima. Do not indulge in too much eating. Yes, we like our food, and food is good. But, he says, the more flesh a person's body has, the more there will be worms to eat in the grave. So, one thing to be careful about. Next, marba dechasim, marba daga. The more possessions someone has, the more worry he has. Marba nashim, marba chshafim. The more wives someone has, or maybe I don't know if it's about wives per se, but I think this Mishnah will require some more analysis. We'll have to get back to it next week. But he says the more jealousy it creates amongst them, and they might even practice witchcraft in order to gain the husband's attention. This was something back in the day, but I think this Mishnah will require a little bit more discussion, so we'll leave it for another time. Marbe avodim, marbe gazel. The more maids someone has, the more immorality there is in the house. Or the more theft, right? You got more staff around, that's what's going to happen. Marbe Torah, marbe chaim. What is this? An important teaching. The more Torah someone learns, the more life he has. Marbe yeshiva, marbe chachma. The more someone sits and learns, the more wisdom he has. Marbe eitza, marbe tivuna. The more advice someone receives from Torah scholars, the more he understands things on his own. Marbe tzedakah, marbe shalom. The more charity one gives, the more blessings of peace we cause around us. Kana shem tov, kana la'atzmo. If someone acquired, where are we? Sorry, I lost the. Yeah, someone who has acquired a good reputation has acquired something good for himself. Right? You have a good reputation, you're renowned for it. But kana divrei Torah, kana chaya olam haba. It's not enough to just have a good reputation. That's important. But if you acquired Torah, then you are certain to have acquired life in the world to come. Any questions before we conclude here? We'll continue, please God, with Pirkei Avot next week. Tomorrow we'll have another shiur, and if I have the time, we'll put together some slides so we could have a nice, interesting, and interactive discussion once again tomorrow. Any questions before we conclude here today? Okay, thank you all for joining. Enjoy these tools for life, and we'll continue these discussions, please God, Pirkei Avos, every Wednesday going forward.
Thank you. Sei gesund.